Hey there, and welcome to a deep dive on a topic that's, well, it's as important as it is often misunderstood.
Yeah,
HIV/AIDS and STDs.
right.
We're going to be unpacking two presentations, HIV and AIDS,
Mm-hmm.
a deeper look, and Sexually Transmitted Diseases 101,
Okay.
to give you a clear and concise and honest understanding of these global health concerns.
Right.
No fear-mongering, we promise,
Yeah.
just the facts and hopefully some surprising insights along the way.
It's interesting to think about how far we've come. We've made incredible progress in understanding and treating these conditions, but we're also facing, these ongoing challenges like antibiotic resistance
Right.
and the persistent stigma surrounding STDs.
Yeah.
It's this constant push and pull, between advancements and these new hurdles that we're facing.
Okay, so let's start with the basics.
Okay.
What exactly is a pandemic?
Right.
Our sources defined it as a disease outbreak affecting huge numbers of people across countries and continents.
Yeah, think of it like an epidemic, but it's gone global. So HIV/AIDS, for example, that reached pandemic status back in the 1980s.
Right.
And these outbreaks can be triggered by all sorts of things, from viruses and bacteria to other nasty pathogens.
Right.
And the impact can be massive, disrupting economies, stretching healthcare systems thin, and even sparking social unrest.
And when we talk about HIV/AIDS, we're talking about a virus with a pretty specific origin story, right?
That's right. HIV, or the human immunodeficiency virus, actually originated from a chimpanzee virus in West Africa.
Wow.
And it likely jumped to humans through hunting and contact with infected blood. And by the 1980s, it had become a global pandemic.
It's a stark reminder that we're more connected to the animal kingdom than we often realize,
Absolutely.
and how easily diseases can jump species.
Yeah, and sadly, in the early days of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, there was a lot of fear and misinformation,
Right.
which led to intense stigma for those affected.
And that stigma still exists today, which is something that we really need to combat
Absolutely.
with knowledge and understanding. So let's break down exactly how HIV attacks the body.
HIV is insidious because it directly attacks the body's immune system,
Okay.
specifically targeting these crucial cells called CD4 cells, which are a type of white blood cell called a lymphocyte.
So why are CD4 cells so important in the grand scheme of our immune system?
Think of them as the generals of your immune army. They're essential for coordinating the fight against infections.
Wow.
So as HIV destroys these CD4 cells, your body becomes progressively weaker and more susceptible to infections that it would normally fight off with ease.
And that's when things can progress to AIDS, right?
Exactly. AIDS, or acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, is the late stage of HIV infection, where the immune system is severely compromised, leaving the body vulnerable to opportunistic infections.
Right.
It's these opportunistic infections, not HIV itself, that are often the cause of death in individuals with AIDS.
That's an important distinction, I think, to make. It's not just about understanding HIV, but also how it impacts the entire immune system.
Right.
And early on, the symptoms of HIV can be surprisingly easy to miss, right?
They really can. We're talking about things like fever, chills, rash, night sweats, all things that you might experience with just a bad case of the flu.
Right.
You might also see swollen lymph nodes or mouth ulcers.
So if you've had a potential exposure to HIV and experienced any of these symptoms,
Yeah,
getting tested is absolutely crucial.
it's absolutely crucial. These symptoms usually appear a few weeks after infection and can last for days or even weeks. The sooner someone knows their status, the sooner they can start treatment
Right.
and prevent the virus from progressing.
Okay, let's talk about those testing options, because I know there are a few, and they've advanced quite a bit even in recent years.
There are antibody tests, which are commonly used. They detect the presence of HIV antibodies in your blood.
Okay.
However, it takes a few weeks after infection for these antibodies to develop to a detectable level.
So that's where the antigen antibody tests come in, right?
Exactly.
For a faster result.
For a faster result, antigen tests can detect both HIV antibodies and antigens, which are foreign substances that trigger an immune response. These tests can detect HIV sooner after infection than antibody-only tests.
Okay, got it.
And then there are nucleic acid tests, or NATs. These are the most sensitive type of test as they directly detect the presence of the virus itself.
So even if you're worried about those early weeks after a potential exposure, there's a test that can give you a reliable answer.
You got it. And that early detection is crucial because it allows for timely treatment and can dramatically improve a person's prognosis.
That brings us to the question of living with HIV/AIDS.
Right.
It's not a death sentence anymore, thanks to incredible advancements in treatment. But what does that journey look like?
Living with HIV has become a manageable chronic illness for many,
Okay.
and a big part of that is thanks to antiretroviral therapy, or ART.
Okay, so art is a game changer when it comes to managing HIV. But what exactly is it?
So ART involves taking a combination of medications daily to suppress the virus.
Hmm.
It's not a cure, but it's incredibly effective at reducing the amount of HIV in the body, which helps to protect the immune system and prevent the virus from progressing to AIDS.
So it's about keeping the virus under control so the immune system can stay strong. What's remarkable to me is how much these treatments have evolved.
Mhm.
I remember hearing stories from the early days of the epidemic, and it was a very different picture.
You're right. We've gone from having limited treatment options and bleak prognosis to having highly effective medications that allow people with HIV to live long, healthy lives.
That's amazing progress, but it's still a lifelong commitment, right?
It is, yeah. Taking medication daily and attending regular medical appointments are crucial for managing HIV effectively. But it's not just about the medication, right?
Right.
Maintaining a healthy lifestyle, eating right, exercising, managing stress, those all play significant roles too.
It's a holistic approach, just like with so many aspects of our health.
Exactly. And let's not forget the importance of mental health and social support, right? Living with a chronic condition like HIV can be challenging, and having a strong support system can make a world of difference.
Speaking of challenges, one of the things our sources emphasized was the issue of antibiotic resistance, particularly when it comes to bacterial STDs. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Sure. Antibiotic resistance is a growing concern, not just with STDs, but with bacterial infections in general. And it happens when bacteria mutate in ways that make them resistant to the drugs designed to kill them.
So the very tools we've relied on to treat these infections are becoming less effective.
That's the scary part, yeah. And this resistance is often fueled by the overuse and misuse of antibiotics, which is why it's so important to use these medications only when absolutely necessary and to always follow your doctor's instructions.
Makes you realize how delicate the balance is. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about prevention. I know we touched on condoms earlier, but are there other ways to protect yourself from HIV and other STDs?
Condoms are incredibly effective when used correctly. But you're right, there are other methods too. One of the most important is getting tested regularly
Right.
and knowing your status, right?
Right.
The more you know about your own sexual health, the more informed decisions you can make.
Knowledge is power, as they say. But sometimes, even when you're informed, things happen. Are there options for someone who thinks they may have been exposed to HIV very recently?
Yeah, there's something called post-exposure prophylaxis, or PP,
Okay.
which can be taken within 72 hours of potential exposure to reduce the risk of contracting HIV.
So it's a sort of emergency measure.
Exactly. It's not a substitute for regular prevention methods, but it can be a lifesaver in certain situations. And on that note, another powerful tool in our prevention arsenal is pre-EP.
Pre-P.
Yeah, it stands for pre-exposure prophylaxis.
Okay.
It's a daily medication that can significantly reduce the risk of getting HIV.
So you take it before any potential exposure.
That's right. It's like an extra layer of protection for people who are at higher risk of contracting the virus.
It sounds like we've made incredible strides in both treatment and prevention when it comes to HIV.
We have.
But what about those other STDs? Our sources mentioned that STDs have been around for centuries.
Oh, absolutely. We have records of STDs dating back to ancient civilizations.
Wow.
Syphilis, for example, has been a recurring villain throughout history.
Wow. So how did we go from those ancient times to where we are now?
Well, the discovery of antibiotics in the 20th century was a turning point, right?
Right.
It revolutionized our ability to treat bacterial STDs like syphilis, gonorrhea, and chlamydia.
That must have been a game changer. But of course, now we're dealing with the issue of antibiotic resistance.
Yes, and it's a major concern. Gonorrhea, in particular, has become increasingly resistant to the antibiotics we've traditionally used to treat it.
So we can't rely on antibiotics alone. It's more important than ever to focus on prevention.
Absolutely. That means practicing safe sex, getting tested regularly, and talking openly with your partner about your sexual history. And luckily, we now have vaccines for certain STDs, which is another huge step forward.
You mentioned vaccines. Can you tell us more about those?
Sure. We now have effective vaccines for HPV, or human papillomavirus, which is linked to several types of cancer, and hepatitis B, which can cause liver damage.
That's amazing. So much progress has been made, yet it seems like many people still don't have a clear understanding of STDs.
That's true, and a lot of it comes down to stigma and a lack of education, right?
Right.
People are often hesitant to talk about sexual health, and that silence can have serious consequences.
It's like that old saying, what you don't know can hurt you.
Exactly. It's crucial to create a culture of open communication where people feel comfortable asking questions, getting tested, and talking to their partners about their sexual health.
I completely agree. Now, I know that there are a lot of different types of STDs. Could you give us a rundown of some of the most common ones we should be aware of?
Sure. Besides HIV, some of the most prevalent STDs include chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, herpes, trichomoniasis, and HPV. Each has its own set of symptoms, modes of transmission, and treatment options.
And I imagine getting tested is important, especially if you're sexually active.
Absolutely. Regular testing is one of the best ways to protect yourself and your partners. And the good news is that testing is more accessible and discreet than ever before.
You can even get tested at home now.
You can, yeah. It's all about making informed choices about your sexual health. And remember, getting diagnosed with an STD is not the end of the world. Most STDs are treatable, and many are even curable.
That's a reassuring message, but prevention is key, right?
Absolutely. It's always better to prevent than to treat.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into HIV/AIDS and NPDs, what are some key takeaways you hope our listeners will walk away with? What's the big picture message here?
I think the biggest takeaway is that knowledge empowers us to take control of our sexual health. Understanding these conditions, knowing how to protect ourselves, and talking openly about these issues are crucial steps towards a healthier future.
We've covered a lot of ground here, from the history of these infections and the science behind them to the latest advancements in treatment and prevention. And one thing that's become crystal clear to me is that this is not just about individual responsibility, it's about fostering a culture of sexual health awareness and support. It strikes me that we've been talking about like two categories here, HIV/AIDS and STDs. But there's clearly a lot of overlap. I mean, HIV is sexually transmitted, right?
Yeah, you're right. It can be a little confusing. HIV is indeed an STD, but it's often categorized separately because of its historical impact, the specific way it attacks the immune system, and the fact that it's a lifelong condition, even with effective treatment.
It's a good reminder that there's always more nuance to explore. So for our listeners who are now, swimming in all this information, what's a good next step? How can they take what they've learned and actually put it into practice?
Well, I think the first step is simply reflecting on what you now know, right?
Right.
Are there any lingering questions you have about your own sexual health? Could you talk to your partner more openly about getting tested? Knowledge without action doesn't get us very far.
It's about taking that information and turning it into positive change, both for yourself and your community.
Exactly. And don't hesitate to reach out to healthcare professionals or trusted organizations like Planned Parenthood or the CDC. If you need more guidance or support, there are people and resources out there ready to help.
One thing that's really resonated with me is how interconnected this all is. Our personal choices, public health policies, ongoing research. It's not just about individual responsibility. It's about creating a society that prioritizes sexual health.
I couldn't agree more. We need to destigmatize these conversations, advocate for better sex education in schools, and ensure equitable access to testing, treatment, and prevention methods.
It's about creating a world where everyone has the information and support they need to make informed decisions about their sexual health without fear or shame.
Absolutely. And remember, this conversation doesn't end here, right?
Right.
Keep learning, keep talking, and keep advocating for a healthier future.
That's a wrap on our deep dive into HIVs and STDs. We hope you found it informative, empowering, and maybe even a little bit inspiring. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.